This week we are covering metacognition and critical thinking. Now, metacognition may sound like a big word, but it's actually quite a simple process when you put it into practice. Now, one of the objectives of our class is to cover critical thinking, and you've already started that by using the wise choice process a couple weeks ago in one of your discussion posts. Another form of critical thinking is metacognition, which we'll be covering more extensively in this lecture and also in the following week as you look at reading strategies. Now, before we go into metacognitive strategies, let's talk a little bit about critical thinking. I like to think of critical thinking as our ability to step back and ask questions. Now, I've heard in my experience as a student and as a professional working out in the field to always ask questions. And I'm sure many of you have heard that throughout your educational experiences as well. But I've also learned that asking questions is really not something that should be used to undermine or to criticize, but rather to challenge and ultimately learn. So you want to challenge your thinking by asking questions. And again, we're covering these different ways of using questioning approaches through the wise choice process and then now through metacognition. So these are some strategies that you can try to employ your critical thinking. So what is metacognition? Again, it sounds like such a big word, but to put it simply, metacognition is just thinking about one's thinking. So it's the process that's used to plan, monitor, and assess one's understanding and performance. And it includes a critical awareness of the way that you're thinking and learning, and also looking at yourself as a thinker and a learner. What is the relationship of college success and metacognition? So this is an important piece that we want to look at because we are in a student success course. So as a student, metacognitive practices does help you become more aware of your strengths and your weaknesses as learners, writers, readers, test takers, or even group members. It helps you recognize the current limit of your knowledge. And I like to say current limit because, again, we always want to employ a growth mindset when we're learning. What you know now is not the extent of what you can actually know months from now, years from now. You always want to look at your learning process as a lifelong process. So metacognition helps you figure out how to expand that learning and your knowledge to extend your abilities. Now, those who know their strengths and weaknesses, so your areas of improvement, will be more likely to monitor their learning strategies and the resources that they need in order to be ready for particular tasks and performances. And this is a quote that was taken from research from Bransford, Brown, and Cocking. Now, how does metacognition help you? So metacognition is not only important in your role as a student and the success you have in your educational goals, but it actually goes beyond academic learning. When you're more aware of your own mental state and your own thinking process, you begin to answer some other important questions, like how do I live a happy life? How do I become a respected human being? And how do I feel good about myself? So you don't want to confine metacognition to just schoolwork. You also want to apply it to everyday life. And I think that is the best way to be metacognitive, to be quite honest, because then you're able to take a step back and really assess all things of your life, which is ultimately what we want to do, is make sure that we are addressing our holistic needs. That means everything that goes into our being. And in addition, when you're able to reflect on these types of questions, it also provides an understanding of other people's perspectives as well, which is very, very important. Now, how do you get meta? So there are several ways you can try metacognitive thinking. So one of the ways, or one of the analogies that I like to use, is you being in the driver's seat and driving your brain. So you're taking control of your learning. So this consists of A, knowing when to put on the brakes. So for example, if you're reading something for one of your classes and maybe you're not understanding it, you want to stop and pause for a bit and make sure that you're reviewing, asking questions, and doing anything that you need to do to make sure you're understanding the material. Second is you want to step on the gas sometimes. And what that means is that you're wanting to kickstart how you're learning instead of getting stuck on it. So an example of this might be, let's say, when you're trying to write an essay and maybe you get writer's block and you're stuck and you just don't know where to start. So instead of trying to start directly with your essay, you probably want to write an outline or organize your notes, look at your notes to structure how you're going to get started. And sometimes that does help. So this is a way that you can step on the gas per se and get going with what you need to do. So again, driving your brain to get you where you need to go. Second is you always, and I said this earlier, you want to maintain a growth mindset. And you want to make sure that you remind yourself that learning is not fixed. Again, it's a lifelong process. We're all continuing to learn no matter what. And be dedicated to do the work. And remember that you want to make progress and not feel like it has to be perfect. So progress and not perfection is what we're aiming for, especially as we go through the learning process. Now, in these next few slides, we're going to cover some metacognitive strategies to try as you're taking classes as a student at Chafee or beyond. So during class, some metacognitive strategies that students might want to ask themselves, or these questions that you might want to ask, are all listed here. So during class, you might want to ask, what are the main ideas of today's lesson? Was anything confusing or difficult? If something isn't making sense, what question should I ask the teacher? Am I taking proper notes for this class? And what can I do if I get stuck on a problem? Now, other strategies to try could be before taking a test. So before taking an exam, a test, some ways that you can prepare is actually using metacognitive questions. So you may want to ask yourself, what will be on the test? That's obviously, the big question, always one of the main questions. But also, what areas do you struggle? What do you struggle with or feel confused about? How much time should you set aside to prepare for an upcoming test? And this is important because you don't want to procrastinate, cram everything in the last minute the night before, which is shown to not be fully effective. So if there's a lot of material to cover, you want to make sure that you're setting aside time, pacing yourself, even if it's in increments, a little bit each day, to prepare for an upcoming test. So asking yourself this question ahead of time will help you be more prepared. Do you have the necessary materials and supplies and a quiet place to study with no distractions? So this is important when you're studying for a test because you want to eliminate any distractions, make sure you're in an effective study environment that will help you learn much better. Next, what strategies will you use to study? Should you just be reading and reviewing material, or do you have practice tests? Is it better for you to study with a friend or form a study group or write note cards or flashcards? And lastly, what grade would you get if you were to take the test right now? So that is a really important question as well. Before you take a test, where is your current knowledge at? So remember, you're questioning, what is your current limit right now? What are your knowledge limitations? And again, that is not something that's fixed. That is something that can change, and you can grow your knowledge and expand it to make sure that the knowledge that you have before taking the test is actually going to increase when you're actually taking the test. So preparation is really key. And I find these questions to be very effective when preparing for any type of task, but especially something for you to try this semester before taking a test. After a test is also important. Metacognitive strategies or questions to ask yourself could include, what questions did I get wrong? And why did I get them wrong? Were there any surprises during the test? Was I well prepared for the test? What could I have done differently if I wasn't? And lastly, am I receiving useful, specific feedback from my teacher to help me progress? And we all know that there are teachers that give great feedback, and there are others that might not give as much. And that is when you want to take initiative and ask the questions to help you effectively prepare for another test the next time you're going to take one. Now, this last slide is a way that you can practice metacognition. And I really strongly recommend that you try this week or in the next couple weeks, maybe even with reading assignments for your classes. These are what we call thinking stems. And thinking stems are a way for you to ask questions or even just make statements that demonstrate critical thinking and metacognition. So again, metacognition is thinking about your thinking. So when you're reading something, you can start with saying something like, well, I'm wondering about this. This passage or this sentence makes me think about this. Or I'm noticing, I'm seeing, I'm feeling, or it reminds me of, and I'm figuring out. And it reminds me of is a way that you can relate material that you're learning, so new material, to maybe previous things that you've learned. And it's always important to connect previous learning with current learning. That's another great learning strategy. So again, this is something to try this week with your lectures, reading assignments, and it doesn't have to be in this class. Actually, I urge you to use it in your other classes, especially for those that may be more challenging for you. Next week, we are going to be starting with reading strategies, and we're going to continue using metacognition as we learn reading strategies. So these thinking stems are a great way to start practicing the metacognitive approach, especially when it comes to reading. Homework number 2 is going to be you demonstrating some of these metacognitive approaches. So again, please go ahead and start using these. And as always, feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. But I hope you see metacognition as not a complex process. It's actually quite the opposite. It's simply you just stepping back and really thinking about the way you learn and asking questions, especially when you're not fully understanding the material. That is always the best place to start when we want to improve our study skills and our knowledge. So I hope you have a great week practicing these skills and be well prepared for reading strategies in the coming week.